In the quiet hills of Ohio, there once stood a house that refused to die. Burned to the ground in 1984, but every night, long after midnight, the air still hums with a voice, a forgotten broadcast that should have ended decades ago. Locals call it the house that broadcasts itself. And if you ever tune to 103.6, you might hear her say, "Can you hear me now?" They said the signal was gone, but sound never dies. It only waits for someone to listen. And now you have. This has been The Silent Screams. Stay tuned. Stay terrified.
The Hart House fire was one of those local tragedies that slipped through history's cracks. A few old headlines, a handful of photographs, and more rumors than truth. According to the official report, a shortwave radio transmitter overheated in the basement, igniting the entire structure within minutes. No one survived, but every witness claimed they heard the same thing before the flames took over. A woman's voice screaming through the neighborhood radios. They're coming through the static. Her name was Lillian Hart, a local radio host who ran a late-night storytelling program called Echoes of Midnight. People said she had the kind of voice that could make you feel seen, even when you were alone. She broadcasted ghost stories, folklore, and sometimes open frequencies, inviting listeners to share their fears live on air. But her final show was different. A recovered recording from her last broadcast started normal. Then, midway through, her tone shifted. She whispered, "Someone's responding on every channel." Then, silence. What followed was impossible. Dozens of voices layered over one another, weeping, laughing, speaking backward, as though the airwaves themselves were tearing open. When firefighters arrived, they found the basement glowing with white heat. The equipment was fused into the walls, the radio dials melted like wax. But here's what unsettled them most. Every radio within a 10-mile radius turned on at once, all tuned to 103.6 megahertz. For years after, no one dared rebuild on that land. Yet, when Matthew listened to the static that night, he swore he heard her again. The same voice from that final show. Can you hear me, listener? That night, Matthew sat by his workbench, staring at the silent radio. He hadn't touched it since the trip to the ruins, but the silence in his house felt heavier than usual, like the walls themselves were listening. Around midnight, he heard the faint click of a switch. The dial on the radio flickered to life on its own, glowing a soft amber. Static filled the room, slow and rhythmic, like breathing. Then the voice returned. "Hello, Matthew." He froze. The name was clear, his name. He hadn't said it on air, hadn't transmitted anything. Still, she knew. The voice was calmer now, almost warm. "I've been waiting for you," she whispered. He felt his pulse quicken as he leaned closer. "Lillian, is that you?" The static shifted, responding with a sound like distant laughter. "You found the foundation," she said softly. "It remembers you." Matthew's speakers began to buzz, faint whispers weaving through them, multiple voices layered beneath hers. He turned every knob, trying to kill the signal, but it only grew louder. Then, through the interference, her tone changed, pleading, desperate. "They're trying to take me back. Don't let them. Stay with me." The power surged. Every light in the house blinked out, leaving only the warm orange glow of the radio dial. The voice whispered one last word before the room fell silent. "Inside." Matthew yanked the power cord from the wall. The radio died, but the sound didn't. The voice echoed faintly through the vents, soft and patient. "Inside." He pressed his ear to the wall, and for the first time heard the static humming from within the house.
By the end of the week, the neighbors started to notice. They said strange lights shimmered above Matthew's house, pale orbs floating like lanterns caught in fog. One man swore he saw a thin column of smoke rising from the old foundation site, though the air was still and cold. It looked like the house was breathing, he told the sheriff. No one believed him until the radios began to turn on. Every night, just after 11:04 p.m., the same time Lillian's old broadcast used to air, radios across the neighborhood flickered to life. No music, no announcer, just that low hum followed by faint voices. People claimed to hear things that felt personal, a loved one's laugh, a dead parent's whisper, a song they hadn't heard in decades. Mrs. Delaney, who lived across the street, called the police after hearing a conversation playing through her baby monitor. A man and a woman talking softly about a fire. It sounded like it was coming from next door, she said. But when the officers checked Matthew's house, they found the lights off, the windows sealed, and the front door locked from the inside. By morning, the fog returned, thicker than ever. The smell of burnt wood drifted across the cul-de-sac, and in the static of every radio, the same fragment played, a faint woman's voice saying, "We're almost home." No one saw Matthew for 2 days. His porch light stayed on, but the curtains never moved. At 11:04 sharp, the lights in his house flickered, and the faint echo of an old radio jingle spilled into the street. The house was broadcasting, and this time the whole town could hear it. When the news of the strange broadcasts reached local radio forums, Matthew's story caught the attention of a man named Roger Hale, a retired electrician who had worked on the Hart property in the early 80s. He agreed to meet at a diner off Route 17, bringing only a small notebook and a look that never left the window. "I wired that house myself, but not for power. Lillian wanted something different. She said she was building a resonant structure, a house that could listen." He explained how every wall in the home was laced with copper filament connected directly to her radio equipment in the basement. She claimed the design would help her pick up faint transmissions, voices trapped in the air. Roger thought it was nonsense until the day the walls began to hum. It was like the house was alive, he said. You could stand anywhere and hear a faint vibration, like static in the drywall. The day before the fire, Lillian had called him in a panic. She swore the signals were talking back, not just replaying her broadcasts, but answering her. She said they knew her name. They were asking to come inside. Roger's hands shook as he pushed his coffee aside. "You think she died in that fire? She didn't." He looked up, eyes clouded. She tuned herself into the frequency. The house became her transmitter. Matthew stared, the air thick between them. "Then what's broadcasting now?" Roger didn't blink. "You are." He slid a small burnt copper wire across the table, one that hummed softly on its own. Matthew didn't sleep that night. The word resonant repeated in his head like a ticking clock. A house that listens, a signal that answers. He sat in his living room, the copper wire from Roger coiled beside his radio. Every time he touched it, a faint buzz ran up his arm, like a weak electric pulse or a heartbeat. At 3:03 a.m., the radio came alive again, even though it wasn't plugged in. The static pulsed softly, rising and falling in steady rhythm. Then came the whisper, not words this time, but breathing, long, slow, synchronized with his own. He turned up the volume and pressed his ear close. A faint phrase emerged, distant and layered. "We're almost home." The lights flickered. Every bulb in the house dimmed except one, the small lamp near the front window. Its filament burned orange, humming in time with the static. He looked down. The copper wire was glowing faintly red, vibrating on its own. Then the voice spoke again, this time clearer. "You opened the channel. Now it's open both ways." He tried to stand, but the sound pinned him in place. It was as if the static had weight. The floorboards trembled, pictures on the wall rattled. The hum deepened into something mechanical, almost alive, as if hundreds of radios were whispering from inside the walls. He stumbled to the breaker box and cut the power. But even in the dark, the house didn't fall silent. The static remained, vibrating through the air, through his chest, through the floor. And when he finally whispered, "What do you want?" the answer came from every wall at once, layered and human. To be remembered.
The next morning, Matthew woke to the sound of hammers. At first, he thought it was a dream, the dull, rhythmic thuds echoing through the fog. But when he stepped outside, he saw it, the field, the place where the Hart House once stood. It wasn't empty anymore. A wooden frame stood where there had been nothing the day before. The structure was skeletal, half-formed, beams rising out of the ground like bones reaching for air. He blinked hard, thinking his eyes were tricking him, but the sound of construction was real. Nails being driven, saws cutting, the faint hum of a generator. Yet the site was deserted. No workers, no trucks, no footprints in the mud. He called City Hall to report it, and they pulled up the zoning records. "Mr. Keller," the clerk said after a pause, "you're listed as the owner. The rebuild request was filed under your name." Matthew's throat went dry. "That's impossible," he whispered. The clerk hesitated, then added, "It was approved automatically. You even signed it." That night, he drove back to the field with his flashlight. The frame was larger now, almost 2 stories. The copper wiring Roger mentioned glimmered faintly between the wooden beams, catching the moonlight. And then he heard it, the soft crackle of a radio. From inside the unfinished walls came a familiar voice, gentle and low. "Almost done, Matthew?" He froze. The air around him shimmered with static. The foundation pulsed faintly under his feet, and for the first time, he noticed something written on the doorway in charcoal. "Welcome home." It happened 3 nights later. At 11:04 p.m., the exact minute of Lillian's last transmission, the emergency broadcast system in town came alive. Sirens wailed for less than a second before dissolving into static. Then, through every radio, television, and police scanner across the county, a trembling male voice began to speak. "This is Matthew Keller. If anyone can hear this, don't come here." The signal reached as far as Columbus. Listeners flooded emergency lines, claiming to hear not one voice, but 2. A woman's soft laughter echoed behind him, growing clearer with every word. "It's almost ready," she whispered. "The frequency's open." Back at the site, the house was complete. Windows glowed with a faint amber light, as if lit from within. No wiring ran to it, no power lines, yet the walls hummed, vibrating with a low mechanical pulse that could be felt in the chest. Inside, an antique microphone stood on a table, its red indicator flickering gently. A police cruiser arrived just before midnight. Officers reported hearing whispering voices coming through their radios, even with the engines off. As they approached the porch, the front door opened on its own, and the air filled with feedback. Then, silence. The transmission ended abruptly. Every radio in the county went dead. At dawn, the house stood empty again, windows black, door ajar. But inside, the floor was warm,
as if someone had just walked there. The microphone still glowed faintly red, and on every recording from that night, one line repeated at the end: "Welcome back to WXBL Radio, broadcasting live from home." The town sealed the property within a week. No trespassing signs, heavy fencing, concrete barriers. They even dismantled the transmitter tower nearby, but it didn't matter. The signal never stopped. At night, if you turned the dial just right, you could still hear it, faint, polite, and alive. "Good evening, listeners," the woman's voice began. "You're tuned to 103.6 WXBL, broadcasting from home." Each broadcast sounded ordinary at first. Weather updates, music from another time, snippets of small-town chatter. But the longer you listened, the more it changed. The voices weren't recorded, they were happening. Conversations between people who no longer existed. Some swore they heard Matthew, his voice calm, professional, as if he had always belonged there. "This next song," he'd say, "is for those still listening." A week later, the fence guards reported something strange. The smell of coffee drifting from the ruins, faint music playing just under the wind. One man claimed he saw lights glowing in the windows again. "He were moving," he whispered, "like someone walking room to room." No one has entered since. Yet every year, on October 11th, exactly at 11:04 p.m., the county's emergency channel fills with static, and then the same phrase, calm and clear, echoes through every receiver across Ohio. "Welcome home, listeners. We're always on air." Locals say if you stand near the field, you can feel the hum beneath your feet, like a heartbeat buried under the soil. Some call it interference, others call it proof, but those who listen long enough always hear the same final line: "Don't change the station."